I'm Grant Wickert. I studied at Syracuse University and then right immediately thereafter at the Philadelphia Seminary. Well, I served in 3 places only for my whole ministry. One was in Tannersville, Pennsylvania in the Poconos. And there I started out with 3 churches, Tannersville, Scott Run, and Appenzell. After 1 year, they broke apart, and I just stayed with Tannersville, and the other 2 went into a joint parish on their own. After 10 years there, I went to St. Mark's, Allentown, on the southeast corner of the city, and there I served for 19 years. And that was the bulk of my ministry, really, in terms of what do I dream about most? People back in Allentown, okay, and events that happened and so forth. And then my last 10 years or so in the active ministry, I was at Calvary Laureldale in Berks County, and that is the church from which I retired. Well, that's where I was. I did serve for 5 years as secretary of the synod, and that was quite an honor. That was under David Strobel, who was bishop at that time. And other than that, I've had a lot of good things along the way that have happened to me. I was a part of 2 major building projects, one at Tannersville and one at Allentown, which were completed successfully and paid for. So that was definitely a highlight of my ministry. But basically, when I think about highlights, I think about people more than structures. And there are many, many people that I can think about who were much a part of the congregations and whose lives I may have influenced, who definitely influenced me in different ways, positive, I hope. And I have many, many friends from all 3 congregations where I served that I still correspond with occasionally, and I still feel a closeness to them. So I have good memories. The first parish I had in Tannersville, you might call it baptism by fire, because they were going through a process of merging, which never happened. And so from day 1 in that particular venue, things had a certain tension that they might not ordinarily have for a first call pastor. But I had been through that, something very similar on my internship, and that is probably why I was asked to go there, because I had some experience with that. But though I love the people in that area dearly, that just didn't work out for a whole variety of reasons. And I can't say that I had anything quite as dramatic structural-wise in the politics, if you will, of the congregations in the other 2 places. But in Allentown, it took me several years to be trusted. Let's put it that way. That not everyone thought that I was on the up and up all the time. So I had to tread lightly for about 7 years. And then the other 12, we really accomplished a whole lot, including a building program. The role of other key people that they play in forming you as a pastor and being open to that, to their ministry and open to their leading of you as a young person especially, but even second career. Ministry is a whole different ballgame from teaching or being a executive in a business or whatever. And even when you're older, I assume that you need to connect yourselves with key leaders who are understanding and yet have a real proven track record in their own ministry. And I would say that that kind of connection with people, not necessarily just pastors, but mostly pastors, is the biggest blessing that I could imagine for a young pastor starting out. Two pastors in my home congregation who were very much role models for me. One was Donald Prigge, who wound up being on the staff of the Board of Parish Education for the LCA in Philadelphia. And of all things, he married my first cousin. But when I was a young boy, that was not part of the picture. And then a little later on in my years, especially my teenage and early college years, he was followed by Edward Weiscotton, who was a wonderful pastor, and I really admired him greatly. I did grow up in Syracuse, New York. I am not from this synod at all. So that I'm naming names that nobody else ever heard of, probably, but that's where I was. And so when I went to seminary after college, one of the things I did my first year in seminary was to meet my future wife. She was there studying for the Lutheran Deaconess community. She has been my rock throughout my whole life since that time, not only in our home, but in my church life as well. And without her, I don't know where I would be. And well loved in our congregations, I will say, as well. And going into a couple years further in seminary was our internship year. And many people in the synod will remember the name Bob Hughes. He still is on the roster of our synod as far as I know. He was my internship supervisor in Ashland, Pennsylvania. And I learned so much from him. And one of the things I had to do, which few other interns did, was I preached every Sunday. And that was usually a once-in-a-month assignment for other students. I did it every week because there were 5 congregations and 2 of us. Plus we had a retired man named Freeland Hemmig who would take the church or churches that we did not have on a given Sunday. But each of us, Pastor Hughes and I, preached 2 services, and Freeland preached 1. In case he was in Ashland, then he preached 2. But that was an outstanding year, and Bob Hughes is a name that will forever be in my background. Followed by none other than the first bishop of this synod, Wilson Toussaint. When I finished seminary, Upper New York Synod at that time, from which I came, had no churches for me. So I was not terribly happy about that. So Bishop Toussaint was taking all comers. At that time in the Poconos, there were 3 pastors full-time for the whole district. That's it. So he was glad to have me, as well as a couple other people. And there were also other areas of the synod where my classmates went. One I think of, may he rest in peace, Bill Horn, who recently passed away. He went to Minersville, which is in the coal regions. So really I felt that Dr. Toussaint gave me a chance, and he was very supportive along the way in my first call. And actually, he's the one who convinced me later on to take a look at St. Mark's, Allentown, which I thought I would never leave the Poconos, but it turned out to be different from that. While in the Poconos also, one of the blessings that God put in my pathway was Pastor Graham Reinhardt. He is in his 90s now. He lives in Loveland, Colorado. He's retired. He and I still email one another. And he was you might say, my mentor up in the Poconos. He was over the leisure recreation ministry there, but he also followed us young pastors, and we had gatherings one Friday evening a month with our wives and children as a whole group, and he and his wife Sandy were always there, and he was almost like a father figure to many of us, but I still love the man dearly, and he's a very important blessing in my life. There's no question about that. And I'm going to mention one other person who never was in a supervisory role or whatever over me, but somebody I always felt close to in the synod, and many people will remember the name Jan Walker. Jan said something to me one day that I have kept as my motto from that day forward, still is really. And he said, Grant, when you think about your ministry in the congregation, remember, love the people. And I've never, ever forgotten that. I've tried to always practice that, even when it's hard sometimes. I've tried to love the people, and I feel that guidance has been some of the most important guidance that I ever received. And it was, more or less offhand comment that Jan made to me, but it sunk deeply into my life. And believe me, I've used that as a guide throughout my whole life, and I still do. It's very, very important to me, and he was very, very important to me. So in so many ways, I have been blessed. It's unbelievable when I think about all the ways God has put people in my path that have helped me conduct, I hope, a successful ministry. And in turn, I hope that I have been and will be a blessing to others.